Sophie McNeil, thank you for your time. We've heard about instances of intimidation and harassment of Chinese students on Australian campuses in the past, but were you surprised to learn just how widespread this issue seems to be throughout researching this report?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke to nearly 50 international students and academics, and this is certainly the most in-depth research anyone has done, speaking to people working in universities and international students about these issues. So it was really quite shocking to see how pervasive and common not only harassment and intimidation, but it's the self-censorship, I think, that is really quite shocking. And I think this report will be a real wake-up call to universities, because too often we've seen that the sector hasn't wanted to talk about these issues, has swept them under the carpet. So we really are looking forward to working with Australian universities to ensure that's no longer the case moving forward.
What are some of the standout incidents of harassment or intimidation that you uncovered through the interviews that you undertook with students and also academics?
Look, it's this threat of being reported on that really sits at the forefront of students' minds if you're from mainland China or if you're from Hong Kong. So it's this fear that if you express opinions critical of the Chinese Communist Party in front of your fellow classmates, that information could be used against you to harm your loved ones back home in China. You know, that there will be repercussions for them. And it's not just a fear that they have. We've seen the real life repercussions of that happen when we spoke to all of these students and academics about these issues. So we verified 3 cases of students who'd had their parents back home in the mainland visited by police or questioned because of activities that they had engaged in Australia. So this was, opening a Twitter account in Australia, a young student who came here and thought that he would finally be able to express his opinions freely because he was studying in Australia, but quickly found that he was still under surveillance and tracked down, and his parents back home were threatened that he would be arrested if he returned to China because of this criticism of the CCP that he had made on Twitter.
Is it just the issue of Hong Kong that seems to be garnering this sort of attention from Chinese authorities, or are there other flashpoints along the way that you've picked up on?
There's a whole range of issues that are seen as quite sensitive by the Chinese government, and where issues of harassment and intimidation really come into play. So Xinjiang is one of them. Taiwan, we have a case in our report of an academic at a university in Victoria who sent an email to her students defending a Taiwanese student who'd been bullied by a PRC student. And she described Taiwan as a country. And this is something that some of her students took offence at. Her name and her details were put online. She was doxed, which is when your personal information is released without your consent. And, the harassment was so severe that the university had to temporarily take down her contact details from their websites.
Are the universities adequately standing up for the academic independence of their academics in this regard?
I think the university sector has been in a really difficult position. I mean, I think a lot of these issues they haven't wanted to know about, they haven't talked about, and they have actively avoided discussing them with their staff and also with their students. And, it was really disappointing to learn that more than half of the students we interviewed who experienced harassment didn't tell their university. And the reason for that, they said, was because they thought that their university didn't care about students like them. So students who were opposed to the CCP and wanted to speak out and criticise it, that the universities were more worried about, blowback from Beijing and being punished, having that tap of international students turned off. So there has been a real disconnect from the universities, and we really hope that this report will be a big wake-up call for them to change their policies on many of these issues.
Well, let's pick up on some of the recommendations that you've made about how this situation could be improved. Let's start with the university sector. What can universities do to make their students, their international students, feel more safe on campus?
So we think there are some really practical steps that universities can quite easily take. The first is speaking about these issues. We've seen a bit of a cone of silence around them. And so, that's why students haven't felt comfortable to report them. But also just laying down a firm red line and saying you can't engage in this behaviour, because at the moment there's not much deterrence for students who do harass or intimidate or threaten to report their fellow classmates. Often these incidents have happened and there's been no investigation from universities or no punishment. And the students who are engaging in this abusive behaviour, we also have sympathy for them because we think they're quite vulnerable to state exploitation. So we think the universities need to do more to protect them from that.
Is there a sense that the work that universities can do in this space only goes so far. I mean, picking up on some of the case studies that you've got in this report, you've got people who've gone back to China who've been questioned by Chinese police upon their return about what they've been doing back in Australia. Is that seems like that would be completely outside the purview of what the university sector can do to help in this situation. How do you address that?
Look, that's an excellent question, and we're not saying that Australian universities have that power, but we're saying you can do a lot to stop it from getting to that. So one of the cases that we've become aware of is a student who spoke out in a WeChat group in Australia and expressed support for democracy. He was then threatened by his classmates with being reported on. He didn't feel comfortable reporting this to his university. The university was actually made aware of this incident and they didn't follow it up. The student who made the threat wasn't investigated or punished. And this student returned to China and has now had his passport confiscated by police.
And Sophie McNeil, just finally, your report clearly focuses on China, but have you heard of other countries acting in a similar way when it comes to Australia's higher education sector?
Sure, China isn't the only country that tries to influence academic freedom, but the scale at which the Chinese government does this, not just in Australia, but globally, is unprecedented. So that's why we've done this work focusing on China. But we document harassment of diaspora communities from all different groups in Australia, the Cambodian, Ethiopian, Saudi Arabian communities. But what we're saying is different about the Chinese government is how they concentrate their resources to really try and influence students, students studying from the PRC in other countries, and academics as well. So there is a concerted effort here by Beijing, and that's why we're calling them out for it here in this report.
Sophie McNeil, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.